Over the years, Siege has seen a lot of updates, many of which have been received with open arms and have helped grow the game and its community. However, with any live service game, there are bound to be updates that don't meet the community's expectation. Siege has definitely had its fair share of those. So in today's video, I figured I could look back at some of these seasons and try to figure out which is the worst Siege season of all time. Now, a season that many players have hated for years and that many will likely want included in this video is Operation Health, and it was released on June 7th, 2017. This season gets a really bad rap from the community, especially those who played it at the time, and I don't know why.
In order to fixing and repairing the game,
as you guys likely know, Siege on launch was extremely buggy and barely playable. There were a multitude of game-breaking bugs, the matchmaking sucked, and the servers barely worked. Because of these glaring issues, Ubisoft delayed the content for Year 2 Season 2 and replaced it with what we know now as Operation Health. They did this to spend the duration of the operation solving a lot of issues with the game, as well as adding more quality of life changes instead of adding new content, with the hope of making the game more playable. These quality of life changes included one-step matchmaking, better, more upgraded servers, massive amounts of bug fixes, and the only piece of new content, alpha packs. They also spent time in this update tidying up the backend to make updating the game easier. Now, all of this was great and necessary changes for the future. So why is this season in this video? Well, Operation Health, as you can tell, was mainly focused on back-end fixes that players couldn't really tell were happening. This caused most of the player base to hate this season since its contributions were not noticeable to anyone except for the developers. Also, it didn't help that communication around Operation Health was terrible. Ubisoft advertised this season as being the ultimate bug fix, and while they did fix a lot of bugs, a lot of their changes to the back-end introduce new ones. So when Operation Health started introducing more bugs, it immediately began getting memed on by the community. And due to the season's infamous bugginess, the entire season made Ubisoft look pretty bad. A lot of players never looked at Ubisoft the same way after this season, despite the fact that this season was actually necessary for the game's future. I'm including this in this video because I know it would be impossible to make a video like this without including it, but I definitely don't think it's the worst season by any means. Operation Phantom Sight, or Year 4 Season 2, is a season infamous to many who played it at the time. This is because this season started a trend that many players complain about to this day. The season would launch on June 11, 2019, and it would immediately become a massive talking point in the community. The reasons for this are pretty simple. Firstly, the operators this season were extremely disappointing. Their gadgets were the worst Siege had ever seen at the time. Warden's glasses were designed to counter flashbangs and smoke grenades, but came too late since Seeing in Glass had already been nerfed heavily, and Knock released in an incredibly weak state. Her gadget barely did anything for her, and since she had an SMG on the attacking side, no one wanted to play her. Secondly, this season was hated because it was the first time all of the operators in the season had recycled weapons. This made the community extremely angry, and it set a bad precedent for the amount of content we would get going forward. The third reason for the season being disappointing is because it was also the first season to bring along a map rework instead of a new map like we were used to. We had gotten map reworks in the past, like the Clubhouse rework in Parabellum, but these seasons also came with a new map on top of it. So map reworks just felt like extra additions. However, Phantom Sight was changing that by making them central pieces of content in seasons going forward. Then the final reason for this season being disliked is the lack of balancing changes. This season did bring the Glaz rework, a nerf to Jackal, and a nerf to Echo, but outside of that, there really is nothing else worth discussing. This season, due to the lack of new and strong content, didn't really affect the meta much going forward, and I remember when this season came out, it felt like nothing had really changed. This is definitely up there for me as one of the worst seasons we have ever seen thus far. However, as you'll soon see, since other seasons continue down this path of diminishing the amount of content we got, this is definitely not the worst in this entire video.
Preparation, speed, precision.
An operation that many players forget being so unpopular is Operation Northstar, which was released on June 14th, 2021. This season, content-wise, was horrible. Not in the quantity of content, but in the quality. And it's a big reason why many players did not like it on release. Northstar brought Thunderbird to the game, which was an extremely weak operator on release because her healing stations were niche at best. As you know, healing in Siege is not very good due to one-shot headshot being a thing. It makes it impossible for players to guarantee they can get use out of their healing utility without getting headshot before they can use it. This includes Thunderbird's Kona stations. Due to this, Thunderbird, at least on PC, never really got any playtime competitively. And the same can be said about the map in this season, which was the Favela rework. This was hated as soon as it was added to the rank pool, and people were auto banning it no matter what. So much so that it would get removed not too long after. On top of all the bad content, the balancing changes were questionable as well. They are arguably what led to the infamous gunfight meta that Siege struggled with for many years, arguably the worst meta we've ever seen. In this season, Ubisoft decided to add the shattered glass mechanic, which heavily nerfed a lot of utility. They nerfed Zofia's M762 assault rifle significantly. Smoke's canisters were reworked to be more consistent. Ash lost one of her breaching rounds, which made it harder for the attackers to deal with utility. Tachanka got a huge buff to his Shamika launcher, and he got a deployable shield added to his loadout. Alibi got her 1.5 in this patch, and that's all that's worth mentioning. The two changes that contributed the most to the bad gunfight meta in the future was the nerf to Zofia's recoil and the addition of the 1.5 on Alibi's weapon. The nerf of Zofia's M762 was so bad that it basically made the weapon useless. So many players started turning to her LMG as a potential alternative. Also, since Ash had been getting nerfed, this made people even more likely to turn to Zofia as their primary breacher, resulting in the Zofia LMG combo becoming one of the most powerful and used combos in the game. Also, Alibi getting the 1.5 led to her skyrocketing in popularity as well, and it called into question whether the 1.5 belonged in the game in the first place. The MX4 Storm was one of the strongest SMGs in the game, and its low recoil made for the perfect home for the 1.5. So eventually, sometime after this change, Alibi would become the most played defender in the game, and other defenders with the 1.5 would follow suit. So basically, the game had now fallen into a meta where an operator's weapons mattered more than their gadgets. All of these things would combine to make Northstar one of the worst seasons in the game's history in my eyes. It really took the game in a direction I did not like, and I almost stopped playing the game altogether during this point because of it. However, there are definitely worse seasons out there. High Caliber released on November 30th, 2021, and the reason I'm mentioning it here in this video is for its lack of content, and in the content that was released with the season, the quality was subpar as well. This season saw the introduction of Thorn, the map rework for Outback, and a small amount of balancing changes. Trust me when I say everything in this patch was bad. Thorn was the worst operator Ubisoft had released up until this point, hands down. Her gadget was useless and her loadout was average at best. Also, Outback was terrible, which didn't help this season in the content department. However, the few balancing changes this patch did add were arguably even worse. This season nerfed angled grips to be 20% slower, Ella's shotgun damage was nerfed, Vinka's gadget got a huge buff, the concussion effect that Ella and Zofia's mines triggered was nerfed to no longer slow affected opponents, and that's it. The angled grip nerf was mainly meant to deal with the somewhat aggressive meta of the time, and the Finka buff was meant to buff an uninteresting and underplayed operator. However, they did not really do anything to solve the problem with the meta at the time, and the game continued to be in a gunfight meta. So because this season didn't do anything to solve the meta I hated, and since it basically added no meaningful content, I had to include it in this video.
The faint buzz is a warning. It may be the last thing you hear.
Brutal Swarm released on September 6, 2022, and it is a season no one will be surprised by being in this video. And that's because it's likely the most infamous season in Siege when it comes to lack of content and underpowered content. The operator that came with the release of said operation was Grim. The reason he was so weak is because of his gadget being clunky and hard to use without getting shot. You had to make yourself vulnerable to launch bees at someone, and even if you did manage to get some sort of use out of it, all the bees would do was ping an opponent you already knew the location of. The map for this season was not much better either. That's because Ubisoft decided to add Stadium Bravo to the ranked pool in this update, a map designed for a limited time event. It was literally just coastline and borders layout mashed together with metal flooring, bulletproof glass, and little cover. Calling that new content was a bit of a stretch and it didn't even play well competitively, so players hated it to say the least. However, unlike other seasons we have talked about, Brutal Swarm did have a redeeming quality, and that was its balancing changes. This season implemented the weapon recoil change for LMGs to make LMGs balanced again. All of the recoil altering attachments were buffed to have a greater effect and to have a more consistent defined use. The suppressor's damage reduction was removed, which resulted in a lot of players actually using it. The MP impact was added to the game, which allowed for a new alternative to Thatcher. Frag grenades had their range reduced, and a lot of attachments and secondary gadgets were swapped around amongst operators. This resulted in a huge meta shakeup when it came to the way people configured their weapon loadouts, and it honestly made the attachment selection process much more engaging. Also, the removal of the LMG meta via recoil nerf was beyond exciting for the community. People were getting tired of it and it had to go. This season did make good moves in the meta, like I said. However, because of how bad the content truly was, I had to put this season in this video. Operation New Blood is likely the most recent example of a season that could be a contender for one of the worst of all time. This season was released on June 11th, 2024, and it was hated because its new content was extremely lackluster, likely the lowest amount of content we have ever seen. The only content of note this update added was the recruit rework, the Finra balancing change, the Solace rework, and map filters being added to standard. That is literally it when it came to content. On top of that, the recruit rework, the main draw of the season, was executed horribly. The only real difference was that recruits could now be played in ranked, you couldn't pick multiple recruits anymore, and you could choose any 2 secondary gadgets you wanted. Many people saw this as a downgrade since doing funny 5-stack strategies with recruit was completely removed from the game now. There really is not much to talk about with this update because of how bad it was from a content perspective, and I honestly think it is the second worst season we have ever seen. However, I think the weakest season of all time has to go to Operation Vector Glare. This season would release on June 14th, 2022. The operator that came with it was Sins, and they were on the same level as Grim when it came to being weak on release. Sins' gadget had hitboxes that were extremely hard to predict, making it hard to get their smoke walls into a valuable position, and they were countered by everything under the sun. These problems with their gadget, along with the fact that they were a 3 armor and that they had the worst gun in the game, made them an absolute disaster to play. Sins really didn't offer anything for the team at large, and their individual strength wasn't enough to make up for that. Then on top of the terrible operator, the map in this season was a deathmatch exclusive map called Close Quarters. This meant there was no ranked map or rework, and it was honestly a waste of time and resources. Much of the community hated the addition of the map, and their time likely would have been best used working on a ranked map. And the rest of the season's additions didn't help either. The addition of the shooting range was something people had been asking for years, and it was welcome with open arms, but the fact that this season only had 2 minor balancing changes and no mid-season patch meant that a content drought was felt heavily. And with the game still in the gunfight heavy meta, since this was before all of the nerfs that came later on, it was honestly miserable to play around this time. This is why I consider this season to be the worst season Siege has ever gotten. The content was horrible, there was not a lot of it, there was virtually no balancing changes, and the meta was in an awful place. Anyways, that wraps up today's video. Let me know if you think I missed covering any seasons in this video, and let me know if you agree with my choice for the worst Siege season ever released in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's video, I make Siege content just like this twice a week, so go subscribe to the channel and follow me on Twitter if you don't want to miss the next upload. If you want to watch another video just like this one, a video will be popping up on your screen right now that I'm sure you all enjoy. I'll see you next time, friends, and peace.